Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome to our series on Arabic Made Simple, which is a product of Quran University associated with Quran Learning Management System. Our first lesson on level 1 would be on pronunciation of Arabic letters. During this lesson, you'll be introduced to the Arabic alphabet. You'll know the number of the letters of the Arabic alphabet, whether being 28 or 29. You realize the difference between the letter pronunciation and its name. And then you'll be able to appreciate the difference between different letters by realizing the articulation point for each letter. Then it would be easy to start to learn how to pronounce Arabic letters that has similar English counterparts. After that, we'll move to learn how to pronounce Arabic letters that has no English similar letters. The Arabic alphabet has 28 letters, but the first letter can be sometimes classified into two distinct different ones. One of them is named Hamza and the other one is the vowel A. So if we consider the A excluding the Hamza, then we end up with a total of 28 letters. But if we add to that the Hamza, then the total would be 29 letters of the Arabic alphabet. There are 19 Arabic letters that has similar English equivalents, like A, Ba. As a result, these letters would be easy to learn by an English speaker. So we'll start with those first. Then we're going to move to another 9 Arabic letters that has no English equivalents, like Ha, Kha, and accordingly more effort would be needed to learn how to pronounce them right. Let's start first with the 19 Arabic letters that has English equivalents, starting with the letter Alif. A. A is written like a stick and it's equivalent to the English letter A. The A is articulated from the jawf, from the empty space of the larynx, and it's pronounced like this. A. A. As in fast. A. Fast. A. Fast. A. And it's named Alif, as in alift. Alif. Remove the T and keep Alif. Alif. A. Alif. A. Alif. Alif. The next letter is the Ba. The Ba looks like this and is equivalent to the English B. The Ba is pronounced as Ib. Ib. As in Ibrahim. Ib. It articulates at the lips, and that's why we classify it as a labial letter. Ib. Ib. The Ba is named Ba, as in battery. Ba. Battery. Ba. So pronounced Ib and named Ba. Next is the Ta. The Ta looks like the Ba, but with 2 dots above it rather than 1 dot below it as it was in the Ba. And it's equivalent to the English T. It's pronounced it, as in bitter. It, bitter. It, bitter. It articulates between the tongue and the alveolar hard palate, and that's why we classify it as a lingual alveolar letter. It, it, and the name is Ta, as in task, task, Ta. So pronounced it and named Ta. It, Ta, it, Ta. The next letter is Tha. Tha. Tha looks like this. It is similar to the Ta, but with 3 dots on top of it instead of 2. And it is similar to the English TH, as in think. So actually in English there is no single letter that represents ith, but a combination of 2 letters, a T and H following each other. Please note also that this combination of 2 letters, the T and H, can on other occasions be representing ith rather than ith. Accordingly, the English speaker has to differentiate whether it's an ith or an ith depending on how they belong to the sentence or the word they are used in. While in Arabic, there are 2 distinct letters. The ith and the ith are looking different and pronounced differently. So the tha is pronounced as ith, as in ethnic and think, ith. The tha is articulating between the tongue and the gum, and that's why we classify it as a lingual gum letter. Lingual gum letter, ith. And the name is tha, as in thank, tha, thank, tha, thank. So pronouncing this letter is ith, and the name is tha, ith, tha. Now let's revise the letters we have learned. First, we have learned about the letter alif. Then we learned about the letter ba. Then ta, then tha. Alif, ba, ta, tha. Is how we pronounce the alif. Ib is how we pronounce the ba. It is how we pronounce the ta. Ith is how we pronounce the tha. The a is equivalent to the letter a, as in fast. The ba is equivalent to the letter b, as in Ibrahim. The ta is equivalent to the letter t, as in bitter. The tha is equivalent to a combination of two English letters, the t and h, as in think. Alif, a, ba, ib, ta, it, tha, ith. Now we'll move to another group of letters. We'll start with the jim. Jim is a letter that looks like this and is equivalent to the English G or J. A very important note is to realize that the G could occasionally be pronounced as ig, which has no similar letter in Arabic. Our comparison with the English G is when the English G is pronounced as ij and not as ig. Ij, ij. Like the G as in vegetable or J as in eject. Ij. Ij is articulating at the wide area of the mouth between the tongue and the palate, the hard palate. Ij. And for this reason, we classify the jim as a lingual palatal letter. Ij. 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 The name is jim, as in jeep, but replacing the P with an M. Jim. Jim. So we pronounce it ij, and we call it jim. Ij. Jim. The next letter is dal. Dal looks like this. Dal. And it is similar to the English letter D. Dal is pronounced as id. Id, as in fed, or id in idiom. Id, idiom. Id, fed. The dal articulation point occurs as the tongue is raised to touch the alveolar hard palate. For this reason, we classify it as a lingual alveolar letter. Id. The name is dal, as in dali, dal. Dal, pronounced id, and named dal. Id, dal. Next letter is dal. Dal looks like this, and it is resembled in English by a combination of two letters, T followed by an H. This English combination of those two letters could sometimes be pronounced as ith, yet on other occasions it's pronounced as ith, depending on the word they are used in. But in Arabic, the pronunciation of those two combined English letters takes the shape of two uniquely different Arabic letters, one for the ith and one for the ith. Ith, as in English with, or ith in the, they, them, those. Ith sound is created by bringing your tongue up to your inner gums. Ith. That's why we identify the articulation point for the dal to occur between the tongue and the gum. Ith. And according to the articulation point, we classify the dal as a lingual gum letter. Ith. The name given for إذ is ذال. Say the lamp and then remove the amp. ذال. ذال. In short, إذ is pronounced إذ and is named ذال. إذ. ذال. إذ. ذال. The next letter is the ra. And it looks like this. And is equivalent to the English letter R. Pronounced as in irrelevant. It articulates between the tip of the tongue and the gum. So, based on articulation, we classify it as a lingual gum letter. And the name we give for this letter is Ra, as in Ra. 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 So, Ra is pronounced and named Ra. 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 The next letter is Zai or Zain. Zain looks like this, and it is equivalent to the English Z or Z. It's pronounced as is, as in is. It articulates between the tip of the tongue is and the lower incisors, and these are the lower incisor teeth, and the area in between is the articulation point, and as we pronounce it, a whistling sound is produced. That's why we classify it as a lingual whistle letter, because it gives a whistling sound. Is. It's named Zain, as in rain, but exchanging the R with a Z. Zain. So, Zain is pronounced is. Zain. Is. Zain. Is. The next letter is the Sin. Sin looks like this, and is equivalent or similar to the English S. Pronounced is, as in essential. Is. The Sin articulates between the tongue and the lower incisor teeth, and it also produces a whistling sound as we pronounce it, and that's why we classify it based on the articulation into a lingual whistling letter as well. Is. And we call it Sin, as in seen. Sin is pronounced S. Seen. S. Seen. S. The next letter is the Shin, and it looks like this. It's like a sin, but with 3 dots on top of it. And it is equivalent to the combination of the S and H in English. And it's pronounced as sh, sh, as in fish, sh. It articulates at the wide area at the middle of the mouth, between the tongue and the hard palate, producing the sh sound. And that's why we classify it as a lingual palatal letter, between the tongue and the hard palate, lingual palatal. Sh. And it's giving the name Sheen, as in sheep, but exchanging the P with an N. Sheen. The name Sheen, and the pronunciation is ish. Sheen. Ish. Sheen. Ish. The next letter is the Fa. Fa. It's like a bat, but with a small circle here and a dot on top of that circle, and is equivalent to the English F. It's pronounced if, as in if. If. It articulates at the lips, between the lower lips and the upper teeth. If. If. That's why we call it labiodental, between the lips and the teeth. Labiodental. If. And the name given for that is Fa, as in fast. Fa. Fa. Fa is pronounced as if. Fa, if, fa, if. The next letter is the kaf. Kaf looks like this and is equivalent to the English K, and it's pronounced as ik, ik, as in click, ik. And it articulates between the tongue, the backside of the tongue, and the uvula. And that's why we classify it based on the articulation as a lingual uvular letter. Ik, ik. We name it kaf, as in calf, calf. Calf is pronounced as ik, calf, ik, calf, ik. The next letter is the lam. Lam. Lam looks like this and is equivalent to the English letter L. Pronounced il, as in fill, ill. And it articulates between the tip of the tongue and the anterior hard palate. And that's why we classify it as a lingual tip letter. Lingual tip letter. Il. And it's named lam, as in lamb. Named lam, pronounced il. Lam, il, lam, il. The next letter is the meme. That's how it looks. Meme. And is equivalent to the English M. And it's pronounced as as in immediate. Notice the meme has two articulation points. One is at the lips. As you pronounce the meme, you bring your lips together. You purse your lips. And that's why we classify the meme as a labial letter. But the other second articulation point that exists at the same time with the labial articulation point is a nasopharynx articulation point. And that's what gives the meme its nasal tone. Nasopharynx. So it's also classified as a nasal letter. So it's a combination. It's both a labial letter and a nasal letter. As we pronounce it from the lips together with a nasal tone embedded in it. It's called meme, as in meme, yet it's pronounced meme, meme, meme. The next letter is the nun. Nun. It's looking like a ba, but more curved, like a semicircle, with a dot on top of it. And it is similar to the English N, pronounced in, as in. It is similar to the meme in having a dual articulation points. The main articulation point is lingual, between the tongue, the tip of the tongue, in, and the anterior part of the hard palate. That's why we classify it as a lingual tip letter. Yet it has a second articulation point at the nasopharynx. This is the nasopharynx, and it is what gives the nun its nasal tone. So it's also classified as a nasal letter. So it's a combination of two articulation points coming together, lingual and nasal. In. As we pronounce the nun, we have a lingual articulation given also a nasal tone. It's named nun, as in noon, and it's pronounced in. Noon, in, noon, in. The next letter is the ha. Ha. It looks like this. Ha. And it is similar to the English H, pronounced as in rehab. Ha articulates at the deep throat, and that's why we classify it as a throat letter. Ha is named ha, as in ha. 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 The next letter is the waw. Wow. Wow is looking like this and is equivalent to the English either a combination of two O's, oo, or a W. And there is actually a difference between the two here. The first one is pronounced oo, like in room, ooh, room. And that is basically articulating from the jawf, and it's a vowel. It articulates from below the larynx, from the jawf, and that's why we classify it as a jawf letter, below the larynx letter. Ooh. The other wow is wa, walk, like the W in walk, walk, wa, not ooh. In Arabic we call this al-waw غير المادية, a non-extendable wow. Oo is not like ooh. Oo is extendable, wa is not extendable. And this one articulates actually at the lips. It comes from pursing the lips. And that's why we call it a bilabial letter, because we bring the two lips together and purse them to produce this oo. So both wa and oo are called wow. The name is wow, as in wow. So the name is wow, but there are two ways to pronounce them, either as a vowel, ooh, as in room, or as a wa, like a W, as in walk. Ooh, wa, wow. Ooh, wa, wow. Ooh, wa, wow. The next letter is the ya. Ya. It looks like this, and it is similar to the double E in English, or a Y. If it is pronounced as E, like in feel, double E, in feel, then it is coming from below the larynx, below the vocal cords, the jawf, and it's a vowel, and it is classified as a jawf letter, below the larynx letter, articulating from below the larynx. Yet the ya could be coming from a different articulating point. Ya, 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 as in year. We call it in Arabic ya غير المادية, meaning non-extensible ya. Ya, ya, not e. Ya here and e here. Feel is maddiya, extendable. Ya, like in year, ye, or ya is non-extendable, like the y. And the second one is a palatal coming, articulating between the tongue at this area of the mouth and the palate. That's why we classify it as a tongue lingual letter. Now both the y and the ya are called the ya, named ya as in ya, ya, and pronounced as e as in feel, or ye as in year, e double e, or the y, ye, e, ye, ya, e, ye, ya. So the name ya can be representing both e or ye. Ya, e, ye. Ya, e, ye. There is still one more letter to address. Remember when we talked about the Arabic letters, when we said that it could be counted either as 28 or 29 letters because of this letter, the alif, which is basically divided into two elements, the hamza element and the alif maddiya, alif element. We're going to address the difference between the two. We're going to address first the hamza. A is the hamza. Hamza looks like this, and it is equivalent to the English a. So it's not like any a in English. It's an a when it is a short, non-extendable a, like a in a book, a book, a. So this a is actually a deep throat letter. A book, a. And we call that hamza. Let's compare the hamza with the alif. Hamza, a, is articulating at the deep throat. That's why it's a throat letter. and is equivalent to the English A as in a book, a book, a book, named Hamza, while the remaining stick part of the alif is a letter with an extendable sound, which is basically a vowel. It comes from the empty space of the larynx, and it has nothing obstructing it. In its track, that's why it's a vowel. And it's like the A as in fast, fast. And the name given for this as in fast is alif. We've mentioned earlier that there are 19 Arabic letters that has English equivalents, and these are the ones. And that there are another 9 Arabic letters with no English equivalents. Till now, we have covered the Arabic letters that has English counterparts. We have learned that the alif is equivalent to the A, and the ba is equivalent to the B, the ta is equivalent to the T, and the tha is equivalent to a combination of the T and H, and the jim equivalent to J or G, and the dal is equivalent to D. The dhal is equivalent to TH combination, similar to this one, a T and H, but with a different pronunciation, and the ra is equivalent to R, and the zain is equivalent to Z, and the sin is equivalent to S, and the sheen is equivalent to ish, a combination of 2 letters, S and H, giving the ish sound. And then we have the fa equivalent to F, the kaf equivalent to K, the lam equivalent to L, the mim equivalent to M, the noon equivalent to N, the ha equivalent to H, and the waw equivalent to W, and the ya equivalent to Y. So let's recap. We have learned the alif, ba, ta, tha, jim, dal, dhal, ra, zain, sin, sheen, fa, kaf, lam, mim, noon, ha, waw, ya. Learning those letters for somebody who speaks English won't be that difficult because of the similarity to equivalent English letters or pronunciations. It will be a bit more difficult to learn the letters that we didn't cover till now. These letters, the missing letters here, are not having equivalent English letters. They have no English counterparts. Let's listen carefully. Ha, ha, kha, kha, sad, sad, ضاد ضاد طه طه ظه ظه عين عين غين غين قاف قاف. As you have just realized, if you've listened carefully, that no English similar pronunciation exists for those letters in English language. Kha, for example, could be present in some European languages, such as German, but not in the English language. So those letters are not in English language. Some of them is only unique to the Arabic. Dad is only present in the Arabic language, and that's why sometimes we call Arabic the language of the Dad, Lisanul Dad, the language of the Dad, because it exists in no other language but Arabic, while Ha and Kha could exist in other languages. So those whose mother tongue is primarily English, when they attempt to learn Arabic for the first time, if they don't learn how to pronounce those letters properly, they tend to replace them with the closest similar letter. For example, the Ha, instead of saying Alhamdu in Surah Al-Fatiha, Alhamdu in Al-Fatiha, they would say Alhamdu. They will replace the letter with the closest similar English letter that is closest to its articulation point. And that's why we need to pay more attention in the next few minutes to learn how to pronounce these letters properly. We'll start those Arabic letters with no English equivalents by starting with the Ha. Ha looks like this, and it has no English equivalent. And Ha is pronounced This is the location where the Ha articulates. It articulates at the mid-throat. We call that the glottal area. This is the epiglottis, and this is the area above it, the glottal area. This is why we classify the ha as a glottal mid-throat letter. Let's concentrate on the ha articulation. The ha articulates from the mid-throat. This is the throat area, and the letters articulating at the throat are called throat letters or glottal letters. And from the mid-throat comes the ha. Comes from the mid-throat. From just below it here, the lower throat, comes the ha. So the articulates at the lower throat. And above the ha, at the upper throat, articulates the kha. So ha from mid-throat, ha from lower throat, kha from upper throat. And this is the reason for people trying to replace the ha when they cannot or they don't know how to pronounce it with the two close letters that they are familiar with. They either replace it with the ha or replace it with the kha. They tend to replace the ha with the ha if they are English speakers, and the common mistake they have is replacing the ha with the ha, as in alhamdu, where they say alhamdu. And in ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, they would mistakenly say ar-Rahman, ar-Rahim. The proper way to pronounce those is with the ha, not with the ha. Alhamdu, ar-Rahman, ar-Rahim. Same thing happens when in certain languages like the German or the Spanish, people would tend to replace the ha with the kha. Because the ha comes from the mid-throat, the kha comes close to it from the upper throat, leading them to the second mistake, which is exchanging the ha with the kha. So they would say al-Khamdu, ar-Rahman, ar-Rahim. This is wrong, and the proper way is to say alhamdu, ar-Rahman, ar-Rahim. So please learn the ha from the mid-throat, ha, differentiated from ha, which comes from the lower throat, and from the kha, which comes from the upper throat. Now we're going to move to the letter kha. Kha looks like this, and it has no English equivalent, but it is similar to the German Bach, or the Russian Rachmaninoff, or the Scottish English Loch. It's pronounced as ugh, similar to the sound you make when preparing to spit. Ugh, ugh. The name given to this letter, kha, articulates at the glottal area or the throat, and in particularly from the upper part of the throat, the upper throat. That's why we classify it as the throat letter. Ugh, ugh. And the name given is kha, kha. Let's now concentrate on the kha articulation. Kha, articulates at the upper throat, glottal articulation, and accordingly we classify it as a throat or glottal letter. Now, just above and in front of the kha articulation point is kaf, ik articulation point. It articulates at the lingual uvular letter. This is the uvula, and this is the tongue, and ik actually happens by moving of the tongue up towards the front part of the uvula. That's why we call it a lingual tongue uvular, lingual, which means tongue uvular letter. Ik, kaf, ik. Let's try to pronounce them. From here, in front of it. Ik, 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 And because they are close to each other, people tend to make mistakes when they don't pronounce the kha correctly. So they tend to replace the kha with a kaf, exchanging the kha with a kaf. An example is Khalid. Khalid means eternal. And if you replace the kha with a kaf, you might mistakenly pronounce it as Khalid. But Khalid with a K is wrong. The proper way to pronounce it in Arabic is Khalid. Kha, not Ka. So for those who never pronounced it before, try to start with the ka. Ka. This is where to pronounce the ka. And then go a bit deeper backwards, as if you are planning to spit. Ugh. So go from a ka backwards and deeper towards your throat. Ka. Ugh. Ka. Kha. Kha. And keep on trying till you master the kha pronunciation. Kha. The next letter that doesn't have a counterpart in English is the sad. Sad looks like this, sad. And it has no English equivalent. And it sounds like this, os. And the closest to its pronunciation in English is the muscle. You don't say muscle, muscle. There is a sad element in the S followed by a C, muscle. The sad articulates between the incisors and the tip of the tongue, where it leaves an area for a whistling sound, and that's why we call it a lingual whistle letter. Sad. S. There is always a whistling sound associated with it. Us. And the name we call this letter is sad. Sad. To know how to differentiate the sad from the sin and to learn how to pronounce it properly for those who has never attempted this pronunciation before, we have to realize that it articulates between the tip of the tongue, between this area, and the incisors, between the lower incisor and the upper incisor. As the tip comes here, it leaves an area for air to pass, giving a whistling sound. Now, is and os, both of them has this whistling sound. So what's the difference? Let's start with the sin, because everybody knows how to pronounce the S. The S is pronounced by articulating the lower incisors with the tip of the tongue. Is is a lingual whistling sound, as we said. Now, is, if we take that tip a little bit backwards, so if we take this articulation point a little bit deeper and move it backwards, and if we take that tongue, this is how it looks when the tongue pronounces the S, leaving an area for the whistling. S. Now, if we take this backwards, the articulation point backwards, and we take the tongue again backwards, making a curvature in it like this, os, it produces the os. So the difference between them is os, is more towards the front of the mouth with a little minor curvature of the tongue, while with os giving more curvature, and the back of the tongue goes more towards the hard palate on the back. So it's a deeper sound. Os, is, os, is. Notice, going backwards and creating a curvature in the tongue, this curvature produces the os. Is, os, is, os. So as if the side is more towards the pharynx, more towards the back. So, os, os. So os is a bit behind the s. Os and s are close, and that's why people tend to replace the os with an s when they don't know it. So a pronunciation common mistake for the sad is to replace it or exchange the sad with a sin. An example is an al-masir. Al-masir means fate. People, if they replace the sad with a sin, it will sound like al-masir, which means walking. The sin here, replacing the sad with a sin, has totally changed the meaning of the word. So it is wrong to say al-masir. Al-masir is wrong. The proper way is to pronounce it as a sad. Al-masir, sad, os, not s, os. The next letter is dad. Dad is unique to the Arabic language. Arabic language is named the language of the dad, lisan al-dad. Dad looks like this, id, and it has no English equivalent. Id is pronounced articulating between the upper molar and the sides of the tongue, and that's why we classify it as a lingual tongue letter, id. and it's called Dad. In order to learn how to pronounce the Dad, we'll compare it with the closest letter to it, which is the Dal. Dad is similar to the Dal, id sound, but more emphatic. We'll explain. Id is a letter that articulates between the gum line of the upper incisors, these are the incisors teeth, and the top of the tip of the tongue. That's why we classify it as a lingual letter among the subgroup of the lingual letters named alveolar letters, since it articulates with the alveolar gum line of upper incisor teeth. So the Dal articulates from the top of the tip of the tongue with the gum line of the upper two incisors. Id, without raising the root of the tongue. The tongue goes up the tip of the tongue towards the alveolar area behind the upper incisor, and there is no elevation of the back of the tongue. The root of the tongue, this is the root of the tongue, it's not elevated. Now, this is what makes it different from the Bad. Bad has an elevation of the root of the tongue, and the articulation is moved a little bit backward. Let's compare. Id, 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 id. Id, the articulation point is in the front. Id, the articulation point is a little bit backwards. Id has no elevation of the back of the tongue. Id has an elevation of the back of the tongue. Id, 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 id. Id. Id is an upper molar lingual letter, and it articulates with raising of the root of the tongue, as we have just seen. Id. Id. This similarity between the Dal and the Dad, between id and id, is what makes people fall into making a common mistake of replacing or exchanging the Dad with a Dal if they are not familiar with pronouncing it properly. For example, in this word, tufidun, which means a group walking together, moving together. If you don't pronounce the Dad properly, then you will pronounce it as tufidun, which has a totally different meaning, making benefit. Tufidun, moving together. Tufidun, making benefit. So you have to pronounce the Dad properly to give the proper meaning. Tufidun is wrong. You should say tufidun, Dad, not Dal. Da, not Da. Id, id. The next letter is the Ta. Ta looks like this, Ta, and it has no English equivalent. It. It's like it, the T, but more emphatic. It, articulating between the alveolar part of the hard palate and the top of the tip of the tongue. Lingual alveolar letter, it. We call it Ta, Ta. To learn how to pronounce it, start with a T. Ta is similar to the Ta, like the T sound, but more emphatic. What do we mean by more emphatic? We'll explain. It articulates between the alveolar part of the hard palate and the top of the tip of the tongue. That's why we call it a lingual alveolar letter. It, between the upper part of the tip of the tongue, this is the tip of the tongue, and this is the upper part of it, and the alveolar part of the hard palate. This part is equivalent to the ridged area of the hard palate just behind the teeth. It. We pronounce the it without raising the back of the tongue, without raising the root of the tongue. Now, if we take this articulation point from here more backwards, towards the pharynx, backwards here, and simultaneously raise the back of the tongue, the root of the tongue. Instead of pushing the tongue up here towards the alveolar area, as in the tia, go backwards here and push the tongue towards the back of the hard palate. This is the back part of the hard palate. We end up with a ot. So back in the articulation area and raise the back of the root of the tongue. It, ot, it, ot, it, ot. It, taking the articulation point more backwards, ot, and raising the root of the tongue. It, ot, it, ot, ot, articulating here instead of there. Ot, ot. Emphatic means that the sound is both pharyngalized and partly velarized. So as we pronounce it, we push the articulation point more towards the pharynx. Phonetically, we write it by adding this little reversed question mark behind the ta or after the t. And since the ta and ta are close, the commonest pronunciation mistake associated with the ta is to replace or exchange the ta with a ta. Like in طباقة, طباقة, طي, طي, طباقة. The people who hadn't practiced pronouncing the ta properly would exchange it with a ta and would pronounce this as تباقة, not طباقة. طباقة is right, تباقة is wrong. You should pronounce the ta properly, not as a ta. The next letter is the va, written like this, like a ta with a dot, and it has no English equivalent. It's pronounced It is like in either, but more emphatic. Is different from and articulates near the gum, so they are classified as lingual dental letters. Dental because the articulation point is close to the teeth. Lingual because the tongue is brought close to the teeth, and accordingly we classify it as a lingual dental letter. It's called va, like the ta but with a dot, in writing, in name, but different in pronunciation. So, how to learn how to pronounce the va. Va is similar to the val, th, sound, but more emphatic. Edge of the upper incisor teeth, with the tip of the tongue brought together to produce the articulation point. Lingual dental tongue and the root or the edge of the upper incisor teeth produce upper tip of the tongue and the lower part of the incisor teeth. These are the incisor teeth. Tip of the tongue and root of the incisor teeth. Notice that the tongue posterior part, roots and sides are flat. They are not raised. Now, if we take the articulation point a little bit backwards and raise the back of the tongue, it produces the va. You have to practice this. So instead of pushing the tip of the tongue towards the upper incisor, as in here, go a bit more backwards, more to this area, and push the sides of the tongue towards the back of the hard palate as well, like this. So articulation point, the red, goes a bit backwards, and the back and the sides of the tongue goes up. Is more emphatic than meaning that the sound is both pharyngalized and partly velarized. It means that the sound is deeper than the sound. As we said, is deeper than the and it is phonetically written by adding a reversed question mark after the va. Due to the similarity between the va and the val, the common mistake of pronunciation of the va is exchanging it with a val, although sometimes people might exchange it with a zain, z, z. So instead of saying of, they would mistakenly say ith or is. For example, in الظالمين, the dha could be exchanged with a dhal and it sounds like as dhalimin, or with a zain sounding like as zalimin, and both are wrong. The proper way is to pronounce it الظالمين, dha, not the, not za, dha. The next letter is the ayn. Ayn, ayn, ayn looks like this, and it has no English equivalent. Sounds like choking. Is as somebody is choking your throat. Because it's coming from the throat. Ayn comes from the deep throat. Is a throat letter. It is named Ayn, which means literally eye in Arabic. Eye, Ayn, Ayn, eye, Ayn, Ayn, eye. Both eye and ayn has a common origin linguistically. If we want to learn how to pronounce ayn, then start with the hamza. Ayn is similar to hamza, sound, but with a choking added to it, choking sound. Articulates from the deep throat. That's why we call it a throat or glottal letter. Now, if we add a choking sound to the it will be Go a little bit up from here to here, from to towards the mid-throat, and close the pharynx as if somebody is choking you. From mid-throat. So the common pronunciation mistake is to exchange the ayn with the hamza. Exchange with like ya'mal, which is a verb meaning to work. Now, if we exchange the ayn in ya'mal with the hamza, instead of ya'mal, it becomes ya'mal. Ya'mal has a totally different meaning. It's a verb meaning to hope. From to work to hope, the meaning has changed dramatically. So this is wrong. The proper way is to pronounce the ayn as a ayn, not as not ayn. The next letter is the ghayn. Ghayn. It's like the ayn, but with a dot on top of it. It has again no English equivalent. It's like a gargling sound, pronounced like a gargling sound, and it articulates at the mid-throat, and that's why it is classified as a glottal throat letter, and it's called ghayn, like the ayn, but with a dot on top, ghayn. To learn how to pronounce the ghayn, you can similarize it, or you can compare it to the kha, or the English ig. So ghayn is similar to the kha, or ig in English, but with a gargling sound. Let's start with an is articulating at the upper throat. That's why it's called a throat glottal letter. Now I'm going to show you how to pronounce the gh. Starts with the from the upper throat, upper throat, and then try to move backwards and deeper as if you're gargling and make the sound. Then we have the ghayn. So the ghayn is a bit deeper from the deeper than the So, since the ghain and the kha are similar, the common pronunciation mistake of the ghain is to exchange it with the kha. For example, غير المغضوب in Surah Al-Fatiha could be mistakenly exchanged with the kha to sound like خير المخطوب, and this is wrong. Another mistake is to replace it with the ig of the English. Ig articulates in front of the kha, here. Ig. And with that, the pronunciation would be mistakenly pronounced as غير المغضوب, and this is wrong. It should be pronounced with إغ, غير المغضوب, not إخ, not إج, إغ, غين. The last is the letter قاف, قاف, قاف. 2 dots, like the fa, more circular, but with 2 dots on top of it. It has no English equivalent and is pronounced إق. It's pronounced at the upper throat, just below the uvula, and that's why it's called a lingual uvular letter, إق. And the name given for إق is قاف, قاف. And to learn how to pronounce the قاف, we can start with the known kaf, ik. Qaf is similar to kaf, ik, but is pronounced further back in the mouth. Let's see. Ik, ik is articulating in front of the uvula with the tongue, and that's why it's called lingual uvular letter. Ik. It articulates, as we said, at the roof of the mouth, just in front of the uvula. Now let's practice pronouncing the qaf. Start with the kaf, ik, from the upper throat, and move a little bit backwards and more deeper. Go a little backwards from ik, more deeper and backwards, and you'll be able to produce the iq, iq, ik, iq, ik, iq, ik, iq, qaf, iq. For that reason, because of the similarity between the qaf and the kaf, the common pronunciation mistake comes when people who don't pronounce qaf properly, they exchange it or tend to exchange it with a kaf, ik. An example is qalil, meaning a little. They would pronounce it as kalil, meaning weak. The meaning has changed totally by replacing the qaf with a kaf. And this is wrong. We should say qalil, qaf, qalil. Also, there is another potential mistake, is to replace it with a ig in English. The ig, as we've said, articulates a little bit in front of the kaf. So ig goes here, kaf here, iq here. And that will be pronounced mistakenly as galil. And this is again wrong. So we should pronounce qalil with the qaf, iq, not ik, not ig, qaf. Let's summarize now the Arabic letters that has no English equivalents. Ha, kha, sad, dad, ta, tha, ayn, ghayn, qaf. And finally, we wrap up with all the Arabic letters all together. Alif, ba, ta, tha, جيم حاء خاء دال ذال ر زين سين شين صاد ضاد ط ظ عين غين ف قاف كاف لام ميم Noon, Ha, Waw, Ya. During this lesson, we have been introduced to the Arabic alphabet, concentrating only on the pronunciation of these Arabic letters. We have paid special attention to letters that has no English equivalents, where we have learned the articulation points of these letters. And with that knowledge in mind, we managed to understand the common mistakes and the reasons for those. we have concentrated on understanding the common mistakes associated with letters that has no English equivalents. In our next lesson, we're going to learn how to write Arabic letters, where we're going to learn how the letter shape would differ between the beginning, middle, or end of Arabic words. And with this, we have reached the end of our first lesson. This was a lesson among the Quran University series of lessons. It's a part of a series of lessons called Arabic Made Easy. The target audience of these lessons are non-Arabic speakers, the primary objective of which is to help non-native Arabic speakers to understand the Quran, inshallah. In these lessons, we're going to start with you from zero, where you understand nothing about the Arabic alphabet, taking you gradually to understand enough Arabic to help you understand Quran in its native Arabic language, the language that it has been revealed with. نأمل من الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يوفقنا وإياكم لما فيه الخير والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.